Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. Former FBI Director James Comey indicted on 2 federal charges. We have reactions from Comey and the Trump administration. President Trump becomes the first sitting president to attend the Ryder Cup. What his schedule looks like. Heavy trucks, pharmaceuticals, and kitchen cabinets are all in the crosshairs of new tariffs, plus President Trump's plan to aid struggling farmers. The Transportation Department issues an emergency regulation on commercial driver licenses for non-U.S. citizens. The new policy follows fatal crashes in Florida and California. Tear gas deployed outside Chicago on protesters as more demonstrators gather at an ICE facility today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the United Nations, the issues he raised, and how some delegates protested.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. President Trump has announced a new variety of tariffs he plans to impose, from heavy trucks to kitchen cabinets. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the details on that, as well as some proposed relief for farmers.
Okay, it's a big statement. Thank you very much.
President Trump says he will impose a series of new tariffs on heavy trucks, branded or patented pharmaceutical products, kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and associated products starting next month. Any heavy-duty trucks made outside the United States will see a 25% tariff. Kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and related goods will see a 50% tariff, and upholstered furniture, 30%. Trump says any branded or patented pharmaceutical drugs made by any companies not building their manufacturing plant in the United States will see a 100% tariff on their products. The president says the new tariffs will be imposed starting on October 1st. On Truth Social, Trump said the new measures are intended to protect American truck manufacturers from what he called unfair outside competition. He emphasized the importance of keeping U.S. truckers financially strong, calling them vital to national security. Regarding kitchen, bathroom, and furniture imports, the president cited large-scale flooding of these products from abroad, which he described as a very unfair practice and also a threat to national security. Trump said pharmaceutical companies will be considered as located in America if their manufacturing plant is currently breaking ground or under construction in the United States. Turning to farms, President Trump said Thursday he would use some of the tariff revenue already pouring in to provide aid to American farmers.
And we're going to help the farmers out a little bit because during this transition period, a period where we're taking in incredible amounts of money, we'll have a little bit of a shortfall with the farmers until the tariffs kick in.
The president says ultimately farmers are going to be making a fortune, but it's a process that needs time to kick in.
They're the ones that let us survive and eat and enjoy our lives, right? Eat too much, maybe in some cases, like mine.
The American farm economy has struggled this year from low crop prices and trade wars with Beijing, especially as China has stopped buying soybeans from the United States. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
President Trump arrived at Bethpage Black Golf Course in Farmingdale on Long Island. He's attending the Ryder Golf Cup tournament between the U.S. and Europe. 4 F-18 fighter planes flew over the golf course and crowds chanted the president's name. Donald Trump! Donald Trump! The event kicks off today and runs through this Sunday. The president will spend 3 hours viewing the tournament this afternoon. Trump is the first sitting president to attend the golf event. PGA said attendees should expect heightened security measures and extra restrictions. The U.S. and Europe will each have a 12-member team. There will be 5 match play sessions. As the current holder of the Ryder Cup, Europe will need 14 points to keep the cup, while the U.S. needs 14.5 points to win. President Trump said yesterday he would absolutely consider moving matches for the 2026 World Cup. He says any U.S. host city he deems unsafe could be replaced. Here's the president.
Any city we think is going to be even a little bit dangerous for the World Cup or for the Olympics, you know, where they have Olympic overthrow, right? But for the World Cup in particular, because they're playing in so many cities, we won't allow it to go to. We'll move it around a little bit, but I hope that's not going to happen. Yeah.
Trump was responding to a question about whether cities like Seattle and San Francisco could be dropped from the schedule. Both have pushed back on the administration's policies on immigration and crime. Seattle's Lumen Field is set to host 6 matches, and another 6 are scheduled at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, just outside San Francisco. The 2026 World Cup will be co-hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico and runs from June 11th to July 19th next year. The United States is hosting matches in 11 cities. A federal grand jury has issued an indictment against former FBI Director James Comey. Comey has been indicted on 2 felony counts over testimony he gave before a Senate committee in 2020. He's the first official to face federal charges in connection to the Russia collusion investigation against President Trump after the 2016 election. Here are the details of the indictment and reactions.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
A federal grand jury indicted former FBI Director James Comey Thursday in the Eastern District of Virginia. Comey is accused of lying to Congress in 2020 about whether he allowed someone at the FBI to leak information to the press. He also faces an obstruction charge, which prosecutors say stems from misleading statements that interfered with a Senate investigation. If he's convicted, each charge could carry a maximum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. Both charges stem from Comey's testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee on September 30th, 2020. His arraignment is scheduled for October 9th in Alexandria, Virginia. Comey reacted to the indictment in a video on social media.
My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent.
Attorney General Pam Bondi said the indictment shows no one is above the law. FBI Director Kash Patel said the Bureau is confronting years of political weaponization head-on. Former Florida prosecutor and legal expert Keith Gross responded to the indictment on NTD's Capitol Report.
When we look at what happened with Comey and Russiagate and the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, it's clear to a lot of people now that the weaponization that happened in our justice system was from the top down.
President Trump reacted to the indictment on Truth Social, declaring justice in America and saying Comey is finally being held responsible for his, quote, crimes against the nation. And some Republicans in Congress are echoing that sentiment. Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene accused Comey of carrying out what she called the Trump-Russia collusion lie that cost taxpayers millions of dollars.
More on the James Comey indictment. FBI Director Kash Patel wrote on X that career FBI agents, intel analysts, and staff led the investigation into Comey and others. Patel said they, quote, called the balls and strikes and will continue to do so. Patel criticized what he called wildly false accusations that the current FBI is politicizing law enforcement. He said it comes from, quote, the same bankrupt media that sold the world on Russiagate. Patel labeled it hypocrisy on steroids. Patel vowed the FBI will remain on the mission until completion. Comey responded to the charges, saying he is innocent. Before departing the White House for the Ryder Cup, President Trump took questions from reporters on the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey and a potential deal in the Israel-Hamas war.
James Comey, now that James Comey has been indicted, who is the next person on your list in this retribution?
It's not a list, but I think there'll be others. I mean, they're corrupt. These were corrupt, radical left Democrats. Because Comey essentially was he was worse than a Democrat. I would say the Democrats are better than Comey. But no, there'll be others. Look, that's my opinion. They weaponized the Justice Department like nobody in history. What they've done is terrible. And so I hope there are others, because you can't let this happen to a country. I think we have maybe a deal on Gaza, very close to a deal on Gaza. How are you? Hello, Peter. And it's looking like we have a deal on Gaza. And we'll let you know.
Mr. President.
I think it's a deal that will get the hostages back. It's going to be a deal that will end the war. It's going to be a deal it's going to be peace. I think we have a deal.
Trump said this will be an easy case, saying Comey lied to Congress. The president said he doesn't have a specific list of individuals facing more charges. On the looming government shutdown, Trump said he's going to see if Democrats want to shut it down. Former FBI Director James Comey was indicted for allegedly making a false statement before Congress and for obstruction in a criminal case. Joining us now to discuss is Jonathan Houlihan, President and General Counsel of Remnant Law. So good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Can you tell us, how do prosecutors establish a false statement was knowingly made?
Well, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, they've really got to show it's knowing and intentional. So these statements made to Congress that intent to deceive, they can provide, there's evidence of documentation that contradicts his testimony. There's other witness statements or evidence that shows that he was lying, Director Comey was lying during the investigation. Also, anything prior inconsistent statements he's made to other people, or just maybe there's evidence he prepared for his testimony, he knew his testimony was false, he had intent to deceive. So really that kind of evidence is what would be key to meet those elements of knowing and willfully lying to Congress.
All right, can you put this into perspective for us, the nature of this case? Is it common or rare for a former high-ranking official to face indictment for congressional testimony?
Well, I mean, taking a step back and really looking at the whole macro picture of this, you've had nothing but weaponization of government against President Trump, or whether we're talking about in New York at the state level, we're talking about the federal system, and this gets back to Crossfire Hurricane. So historically, yes, it's rare, but again, they weaponize government against President Trump. So I think what they're trying to reset norms, reset constitutional norms. Historically, though, to answer your question, think back to Scooter Libby in 2007. He was charged with this obstruction charge for the Valerie Plame ordeal. So Valerie Plame didn't give up his source. He was charged with obstruction and this same similar charge. You had Iran-Contra in 1992. There was another, Mr. Weinberger was charged with this. He was affiliated with the Iran-Contra ordeal. But most notably, recently, Roger Stone, right? Not a high level, he was high level, but he wasn't as prominent as FBI director, obviously. He was charged, he had the same charge placed on him. He was later pardoned. So there is precedent for this. It has occurred, but I think for the audience, they need to really take a step back and understand that this isn't retribution, this isn't retaliation. This is really getting us back to those constitutional norms where you cannot have FBI directors leaking to press. Andrew McCabe contradicts some of this. He was the director about leaking these things to press. Really, if you look at it from an operational standpoint, it was an information operation. These leaks were intended to really influence the election, influence Congress, so they wouldn't work with the president. I mean, his first 2 years, he was really jammed up. So historically rare, but really resetting norms if you think about it.
Right, so we're talking about falsifying statements and obstruction. How serious are these charges in terms of potential penalties?
Well, they carry a maximum. Well, first of all, the 5-year statute of limitations was I think it was September 30th. It's September 30th when it's going to run. So they had to get this indictment out. It carries about a 5-year charge is the maximum penalty. Obviously fines, obviously reputational damage. I think the corporate media is going to say, look, hey, look how bad this is for our government. Can't we all just move on? Again, we have to reset constitutional norms where you cannot weaponize government, especially with a sitting president, carrying on the operation while he was in office. This is the biggest scandal. This is bigger than Watergate. I mean, this is the biggest scandal in American history. So we have to reset those constitutional norms.
Can you also talk to us about, as you know, the grand jury rejected one of the proposed counts against Comey. Is that significant? What does it mean?
It could be significant. I mean, it shows there's some weakness in the case. It shows perhaps the evidence is not as strong as they thought, but it could also show it's a good thing, right? Like it shows grand jury independence. Like they're not just going to they're not going to rubber stamp what the government wants. It shows that they took this process seriously. They looked at all the evidence, and for the charges that were pushed forward for indictment, those seem like strong charges. The one that it's not, there's not a lot of precedent for that in a grand jury where they would deny some and take these other ones forward when they're so similar. But there must have been something in the grand jury that they didn't like. But I think it's a good sign as far as independence and strength for the indictment that does remain.
So I just want to follow up on one point you made in the previous response. How do you respond to certain discussions saying that maybe in this case, there's actually an element of charges being politically driven, specifically here? Is there an aspect of executive influence in this process?
Well, certainly it can be problematic, right? But whether you get down to jury selection and you have this influence, but as far as the government, I mean, commander-in-chief, chief executive means something. I mean, President Trump, he's in charge of the Justice Department. Ultimately, he's in charge of the executive branch. He's in charge of these of all the agencies under the executive branch. So it could be perceived that way. But again, if you take an oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, you have to reset these norms. You cannot let this stand. You cannot let the weaponization of government go forward. You cannot have the FBI director participating in an information operation and the Russia hoax and allow that to go unchecked. This really is about baselining constitutional norms and building trust and confidence with the American people. And that's why it's so important. So the political commentators they're gonna commentate, right? But at the end of the day, this is about the rule of law. And I think Pam Bondi said it, rule of law, Kash Patel said it, rule of law, rule of law. It really is about the rule of law. And what does that mean? Constitutional norms, getting us back to a rule of law based constitutional system.
And Jonathan, are you able to forecast for us potentially what possible defenses might Comey's legal team raise?
I think the number one thing he'll attack is intent, didn't have the intent to lie. Whatever he said wasn't material. But if you go back to the hearing, I believe it was to Senator Ted Cruz. I think the question was, have you spoken to any media or authorized anybody to speak with the media? And obviously McCabe counters that. So that intent is problematic. I think the influence issue could be a possible defense. I think there'll be challenges with the jury selection if they hadn't heard of it, obviously. So that's an issue. So he's got some defenses and everybody's entitled to a defense. I mean, this is the United States of America. You're innocent until proven guilty, although they didn't give President Trump that same courtesy in a lot of ways.
Okay, Jonathan, can I just ask you one more thing? What happens next in this case? I mean, could this take a long time before a ruling?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of once you're in a litigation setting, things take a while. So you'll have pretrial motions. I think on October 9th, he's going to be arraigned. So that'll really set the clock. After he's arraigned, you're going to have pretrial motions. You're going to have discovery. You're going to have jury selection, change of venue motions. All those things will occur. So probably start trial in around 6 months. Assume it would last at least a year. From now is when the trial would be completed, if it goes to trial, if there's not some kind of plea deal. I don't suspect there will be. So I'm certain at least a year, maybe longer, before we get a conclusion in this case.
Well, okay, Jonathan, good to hear your comments today. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
The Transportation Department issues an emergency regulation on commercial driver licenses for non-U.S. citizens. The new policy follows fatal crashes in Florida and California. Stay tuned for that. State and local leaders in Tennessee today revealed federal agents will be joining their Memphis Safe Task Force starting next week.
The story of crime in Memphis is about to be a story of the past, and that's what we need it to be. That's what this effort is about. When I spoke with the president in the Oval Office last week, I reiterated to him and to the folks that are a part of the federal resources here that what matters to us most is that this is a sustained effort, that this creates a long-term strategy for Memphis, for the city to be safe in the long run.
Governor Bill Lee announced the Memphis Safe Task Force will begin next week. He said it will include 13 agencies, including federal agencies like the U.S. Marshal. Lee also said that the National Guard will be on hand, but not to make arrests. He noted that the operation will be mission-driven and could be changed on the basis of needs and local agencies' needs as well. Lee also announced that the state will be providing an additional $100 million in grant funds for public safety in the city. Protesters have returned to an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois, where agents appeared to use tear gas on them. Hundreds surrounded the facility to protest immigration crackdowns in and around the Chicago area. The Department of Homeland Security has reported at least 17 arrests since last Friday for people protesting in Broadview. Federal agents set up tall gates around the property to block protesters from getting to the entrance. This comes as ICE Director Todd Lyons and Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino are speaking out against the Chicago Tribune. They say the outlet spread dangerous lies accusing the DHS of targeting Americans. The two said the Tribune editorial board should be thanking the men and women who put their lives on the line to clean up communities and restore the rule of law. The Transportation Department issued an emergency regulation today limiting commercial driver licenses for non-U.S. citizens. The new policy follows fatal crashes in Florida and California. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy called the issue a national emergency and a threat to public safety.
We're here to talk about, I think, a critical issue, important issue in regard to the safety of our roadways. Because we have a government system designed to keep American families on the road safe, but that system has been compromised. I'm talking about non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses that are issued across the country. So in plain English, this is a license to operate a massive 80,000-pound truck that's being issued to foreign drivers who are not U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. The process for issuing these licenses is absolutely 100% broken.
Non-citizens won't be eligible for a truck driving license unless they meet new rules. Updated requirements include an employment-based visa and a mandatory federal immigration status check. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is also launching an enforcement action against California. The mandate requires California to cease issuing certain commercial driver licenses to non-U.S. citizens. Last year, an illegal immigrant from India caused a multi-car pileup while driving a commercial 18-wheeler in California, severely injuring a 5-year-old girl. Last month, another semi-truck driver in the U.S. illegally was charged with 3 counts of vehicular homicide in Florida. And a rare gathering of U.S. military leadership in one location. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has summoned senior military officers from around the world to a meeting in Quantico, Virginia next week. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell confirmed the meeting but did not disclose its agenda or purpose. Vice President J.D. Vance said there's nothing unusual about generals meeting with the Pentagon chief. And when asked if he planned to attend, President Trump replied, "I'll be there if they want me." In May, Hegseth issued a memo to military leadership. It directed a minimum 20% reduction in the number of 4-star positions across the active duty force. The memo also required the number of general officers in the National Guard be reduced by at least 20%. Hegseth said the move is meant to increase strategic readiness. Now, an update on the Dallas ICE facility shooting. Authorities say handwritten notes reveal the suspect was specifically targeting ICE personnel and property. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the latest.
To include Jan's own words in his handwritten notes. Jan specifically intended to kill ICE agents.
New information about suspected Dallas ICE facility shooter Joshua Yan has been released. After searching his residence, authorities say that they found a collection of handwritten notes.
He wrote that he intended to maximize lethality against ICE personnel and to maximize property damage at the facility.
Larson says that the notes indicate that Yan didn't intend to kill any detainees.
He hoped to minimize any collateral damage or injury to the detainees and any other innocent people.
Authorities also praised law enforcement for putting themselves at risk to try to protect the detainees while shots were being fired.
When Jan began firing, agents from both ICE and the ATF put themselves in the line of fire to move individuals off the transportation vehicles in an attempt to protect and rescue those that were injured.
FBI Director Kash Patel reports that Yan did multiple searches of ballistics and the, quote, Charlie Kirk shot video. He also searched for apps that track ICE. He downloaded a document containing a list of DHS facilities, and FBI found a written note that says, quote, hopefully this will give ICE agents real terror to think, is there a sniper with AP rounds on that roof? Authorities say that they found bullet holes all throughout the building.
It wasn't just targeted at one specific area or through a window, that he showered the building with bullets and was very much focused on hitting anyone that he could inside and making sure that they were victims of his attack.
Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson calls the shooting troubling.
It's very troubling, I think, the trend that we're seeing of increasing political violence in this country. And yesterday's political violence hit close to home for us here in Dallas.
House Leader Hakeem Jeffries pushes to bring down the temperature.
Political violence directed against anyone at any time for any reason in the United States of America, and ideologically driven violence is unacceptable. The climate of violence that exists right now in the United States of America is out of control, and we need leadership coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to take the temperature down for everybody.
The shooting happened close to 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning. One detainee is deceased. 2 others are in critical condition. No law enforcement were harmed, and the shooter died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities say that evidence shows that the suspected shooter likely acted alone, and that handwritten notes indicate that he did not expect to survive the event. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Philadelphia's mayor is facing mounting calls to cancel plans to raise the Chinese Communist Party flag 4 days from now. The chairman of the Select Committee on the CCP said the city should not allow itself to be exploited as a tool for propaganda. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the story.
Chairman John Molinar is the latest critic of Philadelphia's plans to acknowledge the Chinese regime. Writing to the city's mayor, he warned the upcoming flag ceremony will send the wrong message about America's values. Spelling out the major issues, he wrote that the CCP represents a regime that is persecuting spiritual people of all faiths, noting the regime's role in the fentanyl crisis that's killing millions of Americans. The Philadelphia mayor's office did not respond to an inquiry from the Epoch Times by airtime. He's the latest among several critics. Author Gordon Chong asked, "Where are our ideals? Have we become so corrupt?" Philadelphia State Senator Doug Mastriano called to stop what he calls the political correctness.
Let's stop being politically correct here and say no to raising a flag over our city here that oppresses people, throws Christians in jails, takes out organs of people in prison, persecutes minorities, and it needs to stop.
Chairman Molinar wrote, "To cancel the PRC flag-raising ceremony will not only demonstrate that the local government in the United States stands for U.S. values and national interests, but that it stands in support for the people of China, who face the regime's ruthless oppression and transnational repression." Molinar also used the opportunity to spotlight the harmful impacts of Philadelphia's sister city relationship with the regime, warning these relationships are used to promote CCP interests and use transnational repression efforts to silence Beijing's critics. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
An indictment against former FBI Director James Comey. What the DOJ must prove in this case. We talked to a legal analyst after the break. And joining us now to discuss the indictment against former FBI Director James Comey is legal analyst Keith Gross. He's a former assistant state attorney and prosecutor for the state of Florida. He's also the author of the book Dirt Roads to Runways, Defending the American Dream for the Next Generation. Okay, good afternoon to you, Keith. Can you explain for us what the DOJ must prove here in this case against Comey?
So, Comey's been indicted for 2 felony counts, and each of them have specific elements. And the way it works generally is that the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt each of the elements that constitute the given crime. So for the first charge, making a false statement, on that one, they have to prove that the defendant made a false statement a representation that was factually untrue or that he concealed a material fact, that the falsehood was material. So it's not just a small error, it's a significant difference from the truth, and that he did so knowingly, willingly. When we get to the second charge, obstruction of a congressional proceeding, there's a similar set of elements, and essentially it includes the element that there must also be an official investigation or inquiry underway, and that the defendant knew or had some notice of the proceeding, and that the defendant acted with corrupt intent to influence or impede the proceeding through lies or obstruction.
I mean, Keith, how do you prove that? How do prosecutors establish that a false statement was knowingly made?
Well, usually you're going to have to look at information where you can determine what the person who made the statement knew at the time. You know, you can look at documents or emails, other communications. You might have other witnesses who say, I told him this, or he told me that. And those witnesses could serve to prove the level of knowledge that Comey had at the time he testified to Congress. And you can see the details as they laid it out in the indictment, where they essentially recited the elements like any good prosecutor would when drafting the indictment here. And they made specific allegations about which statement they're talking about, that he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports. So based on that specific statement, they're going to look for proof that he did, in fact, authorize someone, either by having a person testify to that, or perhaps they have an intercepted communication.
Okay, Keith, on that second charge, what evidence are we expecting in terms of what the DOJ needs to show to prove that Comey obstructed a Senate investigation?
Essentially, it's all of the elements of the first charge, plus the fact that he did it during an investigation conducted by Congress. The idea being that Congress wanted truthful information from him during his testimony. And when he failed to provide that truthful information and, in fact, willfully lied to Congress, he derailed the investigation that Congress was conducting.
Okay, let's say if Comey's statements were misleading, but it was found out that not intentionally so, does that change things?
It does. You know, if it's not intentional, if it's not willful, then it would be much more difficult to prove these charges. But that gets to be a bit of a subjective analysis that the jury is going to get into based on testimony and evidence presented at the eventual trial in this matter. During the trial, the prosecutors will demonstrate enough facts to show that what he did was intentional. And intentional from a legal perspective doesn't necessarily mean what we think of it when we discuss it in lay terms. Intentional can be proven not by examining the contents of Comey's mind, which of course would be impossible, but by looking at enough facts around the circumstance to show that he knew what he was doing and he did it intentionally, because you can show a pattern of activity, like perhaps he communicated with others or documented what he was going to do in some way.
And also, can you talk to us about what to expect for the possible defenses that Comey's legal team might raise?
They're probably going to raise defenses around each of the elements in question. You know, they would probably work to argue the materiality of the misstatement. To the extent it was false, it wasn't very false. It was just slightly different from what reality turned out to be, or that he did not know the truth at the time he made the statement, and he did in fact testify to the best of his knowledge at the time.
And how strong is this case? What does it mean that the grand jury, rejected one of the proposed counts against Comey? Is that significant?
Well, we don't really know how significant the evidence is in this case because we haven't really seen much of the evidence here in the public. Grand jury proceedings are entirely secret, and so we also don't know their reasoning for why they rejected one of the counts. When you see a grand jury indictment, it doesn't necessarily imply a high probability of guilt. It's very easy to get an indictment from a grand jury because it is a one-sided, closed-door proceeding where only the prosecutor is heard. Defense is generally not heard in these cases in the grand jury proceeding. So the grand jury, seeing only one side of the story, generally does choose to indict.
Okay, there's another thing I wanted your comments on. Can you explain for us what the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was? You know, it dominated headlines for a long time, right? And found nothing incriminating about President Trump's 2026 campaign.
So, based on the Steele dossier, which we now know was funded by the Clinton campaign, it seems that there was a whole of government response in many ways against President Trump's campaign, even before he was elected and immediately afterwards. This ultimately was what we now often refer to as Russiagate, where there was some implication that Donald Trump and his associates were under the influence of Russian operatives. That's since been pretty well disproven. The problem is the facts that were used to prop up this hoax were generated through political means. There were people paid off by the Clinton campaign, and ultimately they used it to get warrants to secretly spy on Trump and his associates. One FBI agent has already gone to jail for his role in lying to the court for the process of getting that secret warrant through the FISA court.
So, Keith, journalist John Solomon said on the Epoch Times program called American Thought Leaders that this investigation hampered the first few years of the first Trump administration, that it stole diplomatic opportunities and thwarted security opportunities as well. Do you see it that way? Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. I think that in common terms, this rose to the level of treason. The way that the Trump administration's first term was derailed. You know, the people of the United States voted for 4 years of Donald Trump when they elected him to his first term. And they probably got less than a year and a half of that term in true benefit because there were multiple hoaxes, there were multiple impeachments. The government worked against our own president. The people that were supposed to be loyal to him in the executive branch, who ultimately, legally speaking, answer to the president, were actively sabotaging him. They were seeking to essentially operate as a coup to destabilize an elected president.
Okay, Keith, just one last question here. How significant are the penalties, potential penalties in this case against Comey? What happens next in this case? Could this take a long time before a ruling?
It could probably be a year and a half to 2.5 years before we see progress in the way of a trial and ultimate sentencing. Both of these counts are felony counts. Each of them comes with a 5-year prison term as a maximum, which if they were combined, he's looking at 10 years in prison. Plus, because they are felony convictions, it comes with all the other relevant trappings of a felony conviction. No longer allowed to possess firearms, no longer allowed to vote, etc.
Okay, Keith, really enjoyed hearing your analysis today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Chinese Communist Party has used this week's United Nations General Assembly to weaponize international institutions against the U.S. through propaganda. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has more on the story.
It is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by century's end. And that requires reforming the international financial architecture to strengthen developing countries' participation. We need effective debt relief.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres applauded the Chinese Communist Party's commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 7 to 10% over the next decade. It's the first time ever the CCP has made such a commitment.
At extreme cost and expense, Europe reduced its own carbon footprint by 37%. Think of that. For all of that sacrifice and much more, it's been totally wiped out and then some by a global increase of 54%. Much of it coming from China.
China produces 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, more than the top 10 economies combined. And it also holds around 15% of global foreign debt, which it uses to exert pressure on governments worldwide.
We're witnessing right now a systematic campaign against American energy. There is a coordinated assault by the radical left, backed and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party, to seize control of our courts, to weaponize litigation against U.S. energy producers.
The Chinese Communist Party announced this week as well that it will forgo the special treatment it receives at the World Trade Organization for its status as a developing nation, a status that the U.S. has criticized for years, as China is the world's second largest economy and not a developing nation.
Certainly, the unilateral actions of the U.S. have caused the most tremendous disruption to global trading rules that we've seen in 80 years. Yesterday, China announced that it would no longer have access to the preferences that a developing country member at the WTO has access to.
Despite its propagandistic announcements this week, the CCP remains the greatest threat to the U.S. and its democratic allies.
China is the most rapidly growing military and the most rapidly growing nuclear power in the world.
It's important to know that the Chinese Communist Party has refused to partake in any nuclear non-proliferation treaty with the United States or Russia. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss the Chinese Communist Party announcing new climate plans is Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor. Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Can you give us what were your thoughts when you heard China's move to set a goal of cutting 7 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2035?
This is just happy talk from China. They're the biggest polluter in the world. They've never cut any emissions in any way, anywhere. They just want to say that 10 years from now, maybe we'll cut by a little bit. Meanwhile, we want all the rest of you, the United States, Europe, etc., continue your complete deindustrialization of your economy so that we could take away your manufacturing base and we could produce the tools of war and industrial production, and you cannot. That's what China really wants here. They want all of us to deindustrialize, and they want all of us, furthermore, to adopt technologies that they control. And let me be really specific here. Solar inverters that are coming from China for our green energy technology, batteries that are coming from China for our green energy grid, these have kill switches in them. So China understands that the greatest power that they could have over the United States is the ability to turn off our power.
So in the end game here, what is China's goal?
The end game is we are deindustrialized and we are running our energy grid on things that they can turn off and on at their whim. I mean, that's exactly where they want to go. Candidly, that's where they already are with Europe. Germany has been massively deindustrialized. And if you look at the headlines from our friends on the other side of the Atlantic, you can find headlines where they say explicitly, China controls a kill switch for the energy grid of the entire continent of Europe. That's because Europe was so ambitious, in the bad way of ambition, to adopt all this green energy nonsense and all the technologies that come with it that, oh, by the way, happen to all be backdoored by communist China, whether it's windmills that are spying on military bases in Texas or military bases in Germany that have connectivity devices on them, whether it's solar panels, whether it's solar inverters, whether it's batteries. These are all coming with kill switches. And so the question should not be, should we in the Western world adopt green energy? The first question is, should we adopt any energy source that is controlled and has kill switches from the Chinese Communist Party? And the absolute bipartisan answer to that question needs to be absolutely not. We cannot let them put kill switches into our energy grid, into Europe's energy grid. That's a hard no. After that, we can have a conversation about what our energy makeup should look like, but it needs to be American-made and resilient against the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, Michael, let me ask you this. Under what circumstances would China actually use this kill switch on a wide scale? Because I would imagine if China did that, the consequences would be catastrophic.
I think that what China really wants to do is to surround the United States and surround Europe. And let me say what I mean by that. They want to have us so compromised that we begin to think that we shouldn't even consider resisting them in any way. If they do something super aggressive in the South Sea, if they were to even invade Taiwan, what they want us to be thinking is, if we are going to go help friends in Taiwan or Japan or the Philippines, if we're going to go do that, they're just going to flip the switch here at home to slow not just our military deployments overseas, but also to sow absolute chaos amongst our civilian population. Our bipartisan leaders, if you get Democrats and you get Republicans, they will describe this in the same way. They say that China is preparing for a 0 day to sow everywhere everywhere chaos all at once, all across the United States on that day where maybe it's they go do something with Taiwan, maybe it's they do something provocative somewhere else in the South Sea or in their theater. That's when they want to be ready for that. And really, I think what they want to do is never use the power, because on the American side, we look at how booby-trapped they have our whole economy, and we just say we can't resist them. It's too late. That's where China's trying to get to.
Okay, so given the current situation that we are in now, whether it's the kill switches that you mentioned, how should the U.S. respond?
We should be ripping out anything coming to China with kill switches. And more specifically, when a Chinese company sells a solar inverter with an undisclosed backdoor, or when a Chinese company sells a battery with an undisclosed kill switch in it, that is massive consumer fraud. That is massive deceptive trade practices. And what we're starting to see now, and we really need to see this scale up, is state attorneys general are bringing the rule of law to the Chinese Communist Party. They are suing them for massive consumer fraud. So this is what we need. Sue them for massive consumer fraud, win a big claim against them, and use that money to rip and replace all these compromised Chinese Communist Party technologies. Sue, rip, replace, make them pay for the booby traps that they put into our system.
Can you put into context the actions taken by the Trump administration versus previous administration on this front specifically?
Well, President Trump is obviously much less convinced of the veracity of the whole green agenda. I mean, he thinks it's broadly a fraud. He's broadly correct on all of that. He understands that we can't be dependent on communist China for our energy or really for anything else, rare earths. He's already negotiating with China. And the very first thing China did in negotiations is they said, we're cutting you off from rare earth elements that you need for all sorts of parts of your economy. So President Trump understands that they have leverage over us and we need to wind that down. And he understands that we'll use that elsewhere if they have it, specifically green technologies going into our grid. President Trump, I think, is pretty clearly reorienting global supply chains away from the Communist Party. He's saying, if you want to sell to the United States, we want you as divorced as possible from the supply chains of the Chinese Communist Party, because we don't want them being able to intercept what we need here at home. That's his big objective that we can see clearly. He also objects to and rejects the whole sort of green radicalism. But the bigger objective is he's reordering global supply chains that serve the United States to not be beholden to the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, Michael, just one last question. Can you talk to us about the influence that the CCP is having on the world currently versus its influence before? Has it increased or decreased?
Communist Party's influence is unfortunately massively increasing over time, whether it's 20 years, whether it's 5 years. But let's just talk about 5 years. Think about the fact that they unleashed upon all of us, the entire world, a global pandemic. They lied through their teeth every step of the way of that pandemic. They lied everything about that pandemic. And of course, they caused the pandemic through their carelessness at best. Even though that happened, the rest of the world has actually become more dependent upon supply chains from the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's rare earth, solar, all these other things. And so their influence is spreading, and they are using that coercion against other countries. And that's why it's so important that the United States lead a breakaway to create supply chains of freedom, supply chains that are controlled by democracies, free countries, and their allies and their partners who they can trust. That's the problem here, is they have provoked the world in an unforgettable way through the COVID pandemic and all of their malfeasance through that. Yet the rest of the world has failed to respond, and candidly, President Biden failed to respond in any significant way to get us off dependence on the Chinese Communist Party. That's why President Trump is quite different. He recognizes that, really it's an existential danger. And he's saying we need supply chains that they cannot intercept and control. One last thing on that. I mean, the actual supply chains that we needed to protect ourselves during the pandemic that they caused, they cut those supply chains off. They commandeered American factories in China that would serve us products that we need. And they went all around the United States hoovering up the personal protective equipment, the medical equipment that we needed in the United States. They had their companies hoover that up across the United States, send it back to China, and then they took over our factories in China. So they cut us off from the supplies we needed to survive the pandemic that they caused.
Okay, really strong points there, Michael, today. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you.